Warning: tuning your vehicle can be a dangerous activity, and there is substantial risk involved. The dangers include, but are not limited to, permanently damaging your vehicle, injury or death to yourself or other people, damaging personal property due to paying attention to a laptop while driving. This video is intended for educational purposes only. Before altering the calibration of your vehicle, you should verify it is in proper working and mechanical condition. Have a working basis of knowledge of how your vehicle works and how the components interrelate, and understand how your tuning software works. Bottom line, you and only you are responsible for making your own decisions, as well as accepting the consequences of those decisions. I cannot be held accountable for your actions. Hey, welcome back, all you cool cats and cool kitties. It's a Silver Surfer coming at you from inside the double wide, beaming and streaming right to the middle of your electric meatball. Today, we are going to talk about all the craziness associated with going to a speed density tune. I recently found out this is not a straightforward thing, and it is a crazy new world. So, I want to talk to you about the right way to do these things. So, why even go into a speed density tune? For me, it happened because when I put on the new intake and larger throttle body, all of a sudden I did not have room to put in my old mass airflow sensor. It was also a smaller diameter, so it was going to be choking down the airflow. So I would force to go to an LS7 style, which was fine. I almost went that route, but I started adding up the costs, and I'm like, man, that's a lot of money. And even then, it's like I physically don't have room for it because I have an over the radiator cold air intake. There's just no room for it to fit in there. You may run into issues, just due to physical layout and piping of superchargers or turbochargers. It just may not work out. You may also have some super wild, crazy engine config with crazy airflow. It's going to cause all kinds of erroneous and erratic MAP sensor readings, and it's just confusing the ECM. So you might as well just get rid of it. But I like the mass airflow sensor. I want it. I don't want to get rid of it, honestly. I don't want to jump ship willy-nilly. I'm not recommending that you do it, but in some cases, you're going to be forced to do that. So, um, let's talk about, well, what happens if we just throw the OEM OS into speed density? Well, versus like the two bar OS, and we're going to talk about both of these things. And it says two bar OS, the HB Tuners version, but really the OEM OS can handle a 2 and 3 bar map sensor just fine. The virtual VE table has infinite resolution. You can add as many rows and columns as you want on that virtual VE table, and it operates just fine. All that's doing is just helping you maybe to define the coefficients more accurately, hopefully more accurately. But by contrast, the two bar OS is a rudimentary VE table. You're limited to, well, that's a typo. It says 33 rows and 44 columns. It's actually 33 by 33. So I got a little defect in my PowerPoint here. But, it's a much smaller, and I'm used to a much larger VE table. So I felt really constrained when I went to the two bar OS. But the real reason is the General Motors OEM OS, and this is Gen 4 and Gen 5, there is a defect in it. When the mass airflow sensor is failed, it confuses the fueling algorithm, or I should say the airflow algorithm, which then trickles down to the fueling algorithm. And you're going to get a huge fueling spike. And I'm going to show you this in the logs. When that fueling spike happens, if the torque converter is locked, you're going to feel it. It's going to violently lurch the car. Um, if you have a loose aftermarket converter that's not locked up, you're not going to feel it. You probably won't even notice it. I don't know what would happen on a relatively tight OEM torque converter that's not locked. I don't know if you would feel it or not, but either way, you have the potential to damage your engine. And it's at least one report that that has happened. So we're going to go into this all in detail. Don't worry. So here's a log of my car driving. And, we're cruising along pretty slow. I mean, you can see 18.6 grams per second. So not going very fast. Engine load's normal. But the thing that I want to call your attention to is that channel over there on the left that's highlighted. It says air calc mode and it says normal. So that means when it says normal, that the ECM is getting all of its airflow information from the VE table or virtual VE table in this case, and that's where it's deriving its information from. So do a little throttle pop, get over 4,000 RPMs is about the critical point. Once you hit over 4,000 RPMs, you're going to see the air calc mode has now turned to high speed. And this means the ECM is now getting all of its airflow information from the mass airflow sensor. In our case, the mass airflow sensor has failed. You can see at the top of those channels over there, it says MAF failed, 0 grams per second. So even though it's trying to utilize the MAF, it defaults over to the virtual VE table. Now here's where things get interesting. Let off the throttle, coast back down, and now look at that air calc mode. It says normal TRNS, which I think stands for transition. I'm not really sure, but it's basically, normally in the coast down process, it would go from high speed, normal transition, now down to normal. But in this case, it gets stuck in normal transition. And this is the trap is now set for the fueling spike. And this is what you're going to see. So we're driving along steady state. You can see that airflow is nice and flat. And then all of a sudden, boom, airflow shoots up and the injector pulse width shoots up. Now that pulse width says 12.7, but keep in mind, due to CAN bus delays, latency, whatever you want to call it, we don't know how long that injector was open, right? It's just sort of when the CAN bus was sniffed, that was the data we were getting. Maybe it was 25 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. Who knows how long it was actually open. But the problem is, it all originates, you can see down there in the graph that says the VVE jumped to 4,900.8. So this is what the defect is in the OEM operating system. The way the coefficients are calculated, it makes that max out to as high as it will go, and then that also maxes out the fueling. So I'm assuming it's basically a 100% duty cycle. At some point, whatever it triggers, it comes back down, but this is going to keep happening. I had one fire off 2 seconds between each other, but normally it's, once a minute or so that these things are just going to keep coming at you. And there's nothing you can do about it short of turning off the engine and restarting it. So you have to ask yourself, well, I've got a lot of horsepower, so I put in bigger injectors and a bigger fuel system to support all this. And what happens when the computer says, hey, let's dump all the fuel possible into this cylinder? Well, you're going to break some pistons and bend some rods. So not a good idea to do this. So I'm warning you. So there are two options to fix it. So we can apply some patches that HP Tuners has provided, or you could apply an entire custom operating system from HP Tuners known as the 2-bar enhanced OS. So let's take a look. So the first option, the simplest option, is you go into the operating system tab, and there are two things related to this. So that top one says speed density air mode, and mine says applied. Yours would say not applied if this is the first time you go in. But you can read the description up there. But this is basically solving that normal transition from getting stuck. And then two below it, the TCS patch. I'll be honest, I don't really know the situation there, the problem and the fix for that. But apparently there's another defect that HP Tuners has identified, specifically with traction control. So if you're going to do this, you might as well apply both. And since you're dealing on the operating system tab, you're going to want to do a write entire the first time you flash the ECM. After that, just do your normal write calibration as you make your normal changes. And here's a post from Chris, the owner of HP Tuners, that kind of goes into detail. You can kind of read that, but I don't know that you're going to gain any more information than I've already told you. The other option, you could say, you know what? I want to do the custom 2-bar OS. So you go back into the OS tab and you hit that button, apply code modification. Um, and essentially this does two main things. It's going to give you a couple more settings, which I'll show you, specifically related for boost. Um, but other than that, it basically swaps out the virtual VE table for a more traditional VE table. And, it's not a pure traditional one, right? A traditional VE table uses a percent of cylinder fill, hence volumetric efficiency. But this 2-bar OS doesn't do that. The 2-bar OS still uses the normal virtual VE style values, which is going to be those large numbers, say ranging from 500 to 3000. And that is, those values specifically are the cylinder air mass in milligrams times the air temperature in Kelvin divided by the manifold pressure in kPa. Now, unlike virtual VE, though, this operates in a more standard table in that you can move these up and down. There's no calculate coefficient. So they stay put, which is, I think, a good and a bad thing. And we'll get into that. If you want to know more about the math, I did make a video, I think it was last week, um, dealing with all of that kind of stuff. If you're into math and you kind of want to see some chemistry type stuff, you may learn some stuff in there. Okay, so how do we convert the 2-bar OS? So just a couple things. It's not a permanent thing. If you don't like it, you can always change it back. So don't feel like you're locked in. You also have a chance of bricking your ECM. So pay attention to the instructions. They're very specific, and we're going to go over all these in this video. It's not complicated, but don't take this lightly. And just like the other option, you're going to want to do a write entire the first time, and then after that, you can do write calibration like you normally would. Now, even though it says it's a 2-bar OS, you can still use a 1-bar map sensor, no problem. And that's what I did, right? I'm NA, I'm still using my factory map sensor. So we'll get into making those changes. And not only that, even though the uh, OS is, kind of called the 2-bar and it's made for um, speed density, you can still use your mass airflow sensor. You don't have to fail it. You can if you want to. So you're going to go back in the OS tab, hit that apply code modification, read that message, and get really scared. And that's fine. It's not that big of a deal. So once you get through that, it's very important. First thing, you're going to want to do a save as. Don't do a save. Do a save as and give it a totally new name. So you can see at the top in the tune file itself, it says OEMOS.hpt. I'm saving it as 2-bar os.hpt. So just give it a unique name, hit save, and then hit that close button. You have to close it. You cannot continue moving on. So then after you close it, you can reopen it. You probably want to go back into the OS tab and then apply that manifold vacuum boost if you're doing a boosted setup. If you're doing some sketchy vehicle swaps or engine swaps, then you may want to disable VATs or starter checks. That's up to you. At this point, there's just a handful of things that we need to change because all of the other changes from the OS are still there. The original OS, it got copied over. So you're going to want to do your map characterization, the map sensor characterization, and you're going to have to define the VE table. And if you want to go in speed density, then you can fail your mass airflow sensor. All right, so for the map, again, it's simple. You're just going to go over there to the map sensor linear and the sensor offset values. Copy those over and just save those. The VE table you'll notice is going to be on the Airflow General tab. And if you go up to the edit menu where you normally see your virtual VE table, that will be gone. And you're just going to have these three tables here: intake manifold, runner, closed, open, and DOD. Now, when you click on those, they're all going to be 0. So there's going to be a little bit of an art to get your old VE table copied over. And I say it's an art because super frustrating. For whatever reason, HP tuners decided they wanted to swap the axes. So virtual VE, you're used to RPMs being on the x-axis, like any dyno graph, right, or any other engine graph you'd ever see. Pretty much RPMs is always the x-axis. Well, screw that, screw tradition, throw it out the window. They wanted RPM on the y-axis. Why? I have to ask why. And then along with that, the map sensor also traded places. So uh, it's I can't stand it. But anyway, there's three ways to deal with this. Number one, you could just throw caution into the wind and do the wrong thing, in my opinion, and just copy the virtual VE table over, ignoring the changes in the axis. Um, and just say, well, hopefully there's enough air in here to get this thing to kind of start and run. And I'll just dial it in. I'll do a copy paste special and fully get the shape of the VE table in place. I wouldn't really recommend this. There's another option. Uh, HB Tuners forum member HJ Turbo created a spreadsheet, and he did create a video covering how to use the spreadsheet. It's accurate. It works. It's fine. I've used it. Um, but it's a lot of steps. It's kind of complicated. It's a good option, but I think the far better option is just to use the transpose option in a spreadsheet to do the work for you. It's super quick, super simple. Just make sure your columns are mapped up properly and you're good to go. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Super easy. Okay, so now assuming we've converted our OEM OS over to the custom 2-bar OS, when you come in here and you take a look at your VE tables, you're going to notice by default, these are the values they give you. So 15 kPa up to 175, which is confusing to me because if this is the 2-bar OS, I'd expect it to go up to at least, 202 kPa, maybe 205, something like that. But it gets cut off at less than 2 bars, so I don't get it. But either way, these are the default values, and one of the first things you're going to need to do is decide on what breakpoints that you want to have. Now, again, as I mentioned, I'm only 1 bar, so I don't need up to 175, so I can get quite a bit more resolution in here. And then you're also going to have to slice and dice up your RPMs. So to save you some time here in this boring video, I'm going to show you what I decided on here. So I started off low resolution in the lower pressure region, so 10, 20. And then from there, you'll notice the second digit is always 2570. And that repeats 2570 all the way up to 105. You will need to set these up however you want to, whatever makes sense for your setup. No problems. So same thing for RPM. You're probably going to want to make sure that you cover idle, maybe a couple hundred or so RPMs below idle, and then enough to cover your shift point at full throttle, and then maybe a little bit extra overrun just in case. So we're going to copy this guy over and come in here and we'll just paste that in there, and then we have that. So this is now what we have for at least on my car, but now we need to copy the virtual VE over and convert it. So let's go over to our original tune, go up to edit and then virtual VE. So we're going to highlight the whole thing and we're going to do copy with axis, which is important. You're going to come into Excel, and now this is a little bit funky. I'll show you, and this will make sense in a second. When I right click here, you'll notice I only have one paste option, and it's keep text only. And if I go into pay special, there's nothing in here. So this kind of stinks. So we're going to have to paste this whole thing. And then once it's in Excel, then we're going to copy the whole thing again and we're going to paste it into a new area. When we do, we right click and you'll notice there's this paste with these little arrows showing you, hey, I'm going to swap the axis, and that's transpose. Or if you don't see that, you can go into this paste special menu and you can see the same icon here. It doesn't matter which one you do, it's the same. And now when we paste it, you'll notice our map values are on top. At this point, we just need to get rid of the columns that we don't want. So in my case, we're going to get rid of 700 RPMs, delete it, get rid of 900 RPMs, delete it, and delete, delete. Oh, 15, we're getting rid of here, delete. And now you'll actually notice that we do have a half. So remember I said, oh wait, delete. So remember I said mine was 2570, but we have a half kPa in here. So if you want to, in my case, like you could keep that in there. It shouldn't make too much of a difference. And then you're obviously going to need to do your driving around and tuning to take care of that. But you could just as easily say, you know what, let's let the coefficients handle this. And when we come in here, you can come in here and then you can take out all of the dots like this. But this is obviously going to be time consuming and you probably don't want to do that. But you certainly can if you want to go that route. Up to you. All right, so now we have this. So I don't want the axis. I only want the VE values in here. So we'll copy this, come into here, drop it in. And let's see if we open this thing. There is our table on reversed axis. And it's customary to copy all these values over to all of your other tables like so, just to make sure you're all good. And that's basically it. Now, if you don't have Microsoft Excel, you can do the same thing in Google Sheets. I'll show you how to do that. All right, so if you don't pay for Excel and you don't want to, and you just have Google Sheets, no problem. I would imagine Open Office and some of the other freeware programs probably have this power too, but you can do the same thing in Google Docs or Google Sheets. We can do a copy and then you can come in here. When you right click, you can do paste special and they call it transposed. But if you do that, you get the same thing. And so you'll notice A goes across and now A goes down. In fact, all of these go down horizontal rather than vertical or vertical rather than horizontal. So you can do the same thing for free just as easily in Google Sheets. All right, so now that you have the VE table sorted out, you got to do a few other things or just maybe some other things to keep in mind with the 2-bar OS. If you are in speed density mode, you can remove some of the mass airflow PIDs from your channel list to hopefully free up some chatter on the CAN bus network and maybe improve the speed, the overall throughput, and reduce latency or delays. You can also, you need to make sure that you should swap your axis on your VE chart in the scanner. You don't have to. I mean, it'll work just fine. It's just data how it's represented, but you'll run into issues whenever you want to do a copy paste special back to the tune. You're going to want to have the axis swapped. Also, if you've been using my dynamic air formulas, you don't even need to use those anymore. Well, assuming you failed the mass airflow sensor, I should say. If that's the case, then you can just use your normal fuel trims. You don't have to worry about dynamic air. And then the biggest thing, though, is just, and I found this super difficult. I've been, elbows deep into virtual VE for a few years now, and it's just how I think, right? And it's how I visualize. And so for me to wrap my brain around the swapped axis it's a total mind bending experience. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody, but just keep that in mind. It's a big change for me. Also, there's no more calculate coefficients, which a good and bad thing. Um, it's a nice change, right? So I've been, like I said, elbows deep in virtual VE for the past few years. And, at first it was frustrating because it's like, I want the VE table to do this. And then I hit calculate coefficients and it does the opposite, right? Sometimes anyway. And so it's like, man, it would just be so much simpler if I could just have this table do what I want it to do. But what I found out is that I started missing the calculate coefficients because tell you, I learned to, I think, in the back of my mind, unintentionally, like rely on them because I would just get the shape that I want kind of close enough. It wouldn't be perfect, but I knew that I get it where I want, and as soon as I hit calculate coefficients, it's gonna smooth it out for me. At least if you know what you're doing, right? And you get better at that as you go along. But I found that maintaining a manual VE table is a lot of work. You do a copy paste special and man, you have stuff all over the place. And it made me really miss having those calculate coefficients buttons. As crazy as that sounds, it's the truth. So just a couple other items in here. As you go poking around through that two bar OS, you notice on a couple tabs, on the fuel tab anyway, you'll see there's boost enrichment and then boost fuel cutoff. So if you are boosted, you may want to play with those, give you a few other options to mess around with that. Anyway, I want to say I appreciate your time watching, and hope you have a good one. See you in the winter circle, dudes. Later.